Good afternoon, everyone. I am Greg Nelson with Ralph Anderson and Associates. Represent the search firm that the King County Health Council is hired to conduct the OLEO director recruitment. And today we're having the second of two community meetings as part of that process. I'll be continuing to admit a few people into the meeting as we are about to begin. And I just want to take a few minutes and just talk a little bit about the process and where we're at and how this input from today's meeting is going to be used. So the search process began back in March of this year to recruit the King County OLEO director. The King County OLEO director, as many of you know, is the Oversight office that provides oversight for the King County Sheriff's Department, and the director of that office, this position, reports to the King County Council. We had begun the search back in March, as I had said, and one of the key components of beginning the search was for the council to establish an advisory committee. That advisory committee represented many diverse viewpoints around this position and provided input into the candidate profile and the attributes to be sought in the position. With that input and direction from the council, we opened the search late in March and had the recruitment open until May 3rd. We were able to attract 32 candidates for the position, which is pretty strong given the unique nature of this position. And through the vetting process, a subcommittee of the council, a 3-member subcommittee of the council, conducted some preliminary interviews on June 18th. Based on that June 18th interview, we reduced the field down to 2 finalists. And that's a key distinction in Washington. In the state of Washington, once candidates become finalists, they become public. And we're able to balance a period of confidentiality where we can really try to attract top talent for the position. People can apply for the position without their current employers knowing. But once they become finalists in Washington, they become public. So the process has become very open right now. And we're going to use this open time to collect a lot of input that can be provided back to the council to help with their decision. So I just want to recap some of these finalist activities, how input's being collected, how it will be used, and then we'll go ahead and begin. So the first step for the finalists was to meet with the staff in the OLEO office. That's something they did yesterday, and we're collected staff feedback and are going to provide that to the council. We had our first of 2 community meetings last night from 6 p.m. till almost 8 p.m. And then we're having, of course, the second meeting today. These 2 meetings, there will be an opportunity to provide feedback from all of you. And we're also going to record these meetings and provide a link to the feedback tool so that anyone that's not able to attend but can watch the meeting later and still provide feedback can do that offline. And I'll post that survey link in the chat. I'll probably do it a few times. I want to make sure everybody sees it. So again, the survey opportunity, I would encourage you to do that at the end after you've had a chance to see both of the candidates, because the survey will ask for feedback on both. And then on the county's website for this position, you'll see the recordings and again, the opportunity to provide that feedback. So after these 2 community meetings, the 2 finalists are going to interview on Monday, the 19th, with that recruitment advisory committee that I had mentioned before. And we will collect feedback from that interview process. And all of that gets fed into the King County Council's final interview with the finalists on the 20th. So they'll be able to hear feedback from the OLEO staff, from the community through these community meetings, from the recruitment advisory committee, plus their own experience, and use that to help guide them toward a decision. It's an involved process. It's a very inclusive process. We want to just provide a maximum opportunity for people to engage and provide input to help the council with a very difficult decision, a very important decision. So with that, I'm going to go over the itinerary for our meeting today, and then we'll get started with our first candidate. As each candidate comes in, I'm gonna be the moderator and ask them to take a few minutes, maybe up to 5 minutes, and really fully introduce themselves to all of you, as well as why they're interested in the position, why they want to be the director for the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight in King County. And following that introduction, there are 3 prepared questions. The candidates were given these 3 questions in advance, so they've had some time to think about them. I'll be asking the questions. The candidates will have approximately 5 minutes to respond to each of these questions. And then following those 3 questions, we're just going to open it up, and we're going to take up to about 20 minutes of questions from any and all of you that want to participate. We have about 35 people in this meeting. Yesterday, we had just under 50, and it really worked out pretty well not to have to use the raise hands feature of Zoom. So really, whatever you're comfortable with, if you want to use the raise hands feature, just click the reactions button and click raise hand, and that will just signal you have a question. But I think it will work equally well if you just speak up. At least that was our experience yesterday. And so we're looking forward to a good conversation from all of you with these 2 finalist candidates. And then in between the 2 interviews, we'll take a short break, perhaps 5 minutes or so, and we'll post our return time in the chat so everyone knows when we'll be coming back, and we'll repeat the second candidate in this very same approach as we did with the first. So with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And again, if anyone has a question in the chat, I will try my best to pay attention to both of that and everything else that's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Mr. Eddie Aubrey into the meeting.
Unmute and start video.
Eddie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon there, Greg.
Very good to see you again. This is the second of these 2 community meetings. So the format is going to follow exactly the same. If you just take a few minutes and explain to the community here in King County how your career path has prepared you for this position. Just introduce yourself and also explain why you're interested in being the next director for OLEO.
All right, great. Thank you very much for that introduction there a little bit, Greg, there. So first of all, I have a passion, a lifelong demonstrated history of experience to make a difference and add value in civilian oversight, the community, and in police services. If given this opportunity, this may be the most important work I've ever done. I think my story is important to show that I have walked the talk and not just talk a good game about what I will do. I was born in Tacoma, but I grew up in South Central Los Angeles as a bicultural individual of African American and Korean descent, where I saw racial inequalities in the community. Some examples of those were racial discrimination in housing in Tacoma and Los Angeles based upon my parents' ethnic background. And personally, as a teenager, I had an identity crisis of not belonging to any ethnic group because of my mixed race. But my mom and dad taught me the importance of service. So at a young age of 20 years old, I thought public service could make a difference about the inequalities of fairness, which is what I saw when I was growing up. So I decided maybe I think being a police officer would do that. So I became a police officer at the Santa Monica Police Departments and the Los Angeles Police Departments back in the 1980s. But what I found was a system and infrastructure that led to unfair application of enforcement that harmed people of color like me. So at that point, it was a pivoting point of change for me. That pivoting point was the Rodney King incident. I found myself as an African-American Korean individual on a Metro bus at night in riot gear, cars overturned, shots being fired. My community was in flames. My pet boy was in flames. And the social unrest that I saw really affected my idea of what was right and wrong. And I just said to myself, you know, there's just got to be a better way. So at this point, that pivoting meant that I left the police department and I returned to the Northwest to go to law school at the Seattle University School of Law because I thought that attorneys could make a difference about fairness and inequalities. I was shortly hired as a deputy prosecuting attorney at the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and later in my career as chief prosecuting attorney at Renton. But what I found was a system and an infrastructure that harmed people of color like me again in an assembly line of justice. And I thought to myself, that just is not justice. Also, at the same time, I was a judge pro tem, which is a part-time judge in King County District Court, Kent Municipal Court, and the Auburn Municipal Court. But what I found as a judge that there was racial disparity that again harmed people of color like me. So at this point, I decided to change my focus, and this was another pivoting point of change in my life. So I left being a prosecutor and I became director at Tacoma Community College so I could gain leadership skills that I could use somewhere in the future. Didn't know where or how, but I knew that was really important. So I ended up managing 3 different departments, 36 employees, and an annual budget of $3 million. While at Tacoma Community College, I realized that for meaningful change to occur in law and justice that I was in prior to that, it had to come from the outside and not police policing the police. So I saw an opportunity in civilian oversight to do this. I started overseeing the Fresno Police Department outside of the police department as a civilian police auditor or independent reviewer, working with communities and stakeholders. And we had amazing results. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. I had the next opportunity of overseeing the Richmond Police Department in the San Francisco Bay Area from inside the police department as a civilian manager of the Office of Professional Accountability, similar but not the same as your OPA office here in Seattle. That's where I am now. Now, to note, very few civilian oversight leaders or civilians at all ever have this valuable experience of leading a police department internal affairs operation where I am the civilian that manages and supervises all cases, officer-involved shootings, in custody deaths, et cetera. So basically, if you look at my experience from prior and look at my experience inside and outside, it's sort of a soup analogy. I know the ingredients of what the soup is. I know what should be there. I know the ingredients that are missing, but more importantly, I also know why those ingredients are missing. I have 12 years of leadership experience within civilian oversight and also as a NACOL certified practitioner oversight in Washington, California. Nationally and internationally, I've spoken in Mexico City. This provides me with a very unique 360-degree view of civilian oversight, along with my evolution in law and justice and executive leadership. One other thing that I wanted to mention was that my 27 years as an attorney in King County provides me with the relationships that support my legitimacy and credibility in the community. And that's important, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I also have a relationship with the King County Oleo because I've been following this program since 2010, Seattle OPA office, the Tacoma Peace Project, the Seattle and NACOL civilian oversight experts in the Northwest, and Washington attorneys involved in oversight and civil litigation. But on a personal note, as a true Washingtonian, my wife and I own a home in South King County. My wife is a CASA volunteer advocate with the King County Superior Court representing the voice of children. I'm a diehard Seahawks fan, so go Hawks. And my son lives in Bellevue, who just got engaged this year. So it really would be great to be back at this time. But the thing is, I applied for this position because I believe the community deserves meaningful and progressive accountability. I've proven that and demonstrated that even though I have experience in law enforcement and the justice system, my transformative evolution and expertise has translated into real results in civilian oversight and casts a vision to what real oversight can be. That leadership, legitimacy, and results will leave a legacy that will outlast our times at King County, the term of the director here, and become a model for the rest of the nation to replicate. So I hope that tells you a little bit about me, and I can go ahead and answer some of the questions that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Aubrey. I will jump right into the 3 prepared questions. The first of which is, what do you believe are the necessary ingredients for an effective police oversight office? And based on your evaluation of Oleo, What is King County doing right and what changes are needed?
Great. Well, like I said, I've been watching Olio and participating in bits and pieces and such since its inception, since they were going through the charter amendments. Prior to that, the blue ribbon panel that was there. So, but what's clear to me is what effective oversight is already contained in the NACOL Code of Ethics, the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. I'll refer to that many times. It's in their Code of Ethics. It's also in the Olio 2019 annual report that Deborah Jake has authored. And also just yesterday, NACOL came out with the Evolution and Growth of Civilian Oversight, sponsored by the Department of Justice. So those things are there, and I embody all of those things. I've been a NACOL member, like I said, since 2009, a certified practitioner of oversight, and I embody all of those. However, the most important ingredient is not in those documents, and that is implementation. And with implementation comes with selection of the right person. Now, for example, there are clear instructions on how to build a desk, let's say. But if you don't implement that procedure, that process, or you don't have the right individual in there, the response may not turn out to be well. It may be a crooked desk. It may be a desk that falls apart. So the key to implementation, though, in oversight is authentic relationships and communications. You just cannot get around that. Interpersonal communications with stakeholders, team members, and putting out public reports that support the trust, the credibility, integrity, fairness, unbiasedness, demeanor, and legitimacy is critical. An effective, cohesive team at Olio also empowers leaders to work towards a thriving, trusting, and accountable community. And that's really important. I got to meet with some of the great leaders yesterday. Now, just to mention one or two things from the Code of Ethics and NACOL's practices and oversight is education for everyone, real-time and complete unfettered information to Olio, and real-time information to public about critical incidents, about the work of oversight in Olio. So what has King County got right? Now, just to mention a few, King County had the basic structure. When they started off, it only had a couple people, well, one person, then it made to a couple. And during the evolution of that, I would say in the era after 2015, thereabouts, the office increased. Deborah Jacobs came into the office, and that it increased the staff with critical roles. They've made excellent policy recommendations, and they gained the support. They gained the support for increased Olio authority through the charter amendments and such things like that that the voters have passed. The charters 1, 4, 5, and 6, and they have authored some very good reports, solid reports. Now the changes, I'm just going to mention a few because we could talk about a lot of different nuances of this. But let me just make one thing clear. Olio should not be part of the collective bargaining agreement anymore based on the newly passed charter amendments. I know that from experience because in California, that does not even exist. So I understand how it got there, but based on the new charter amendments that passed, it should not be there. But if for some reason it remains, then the new appointed sheriff and Olio should have a joint vision of oversight that is contained in their policy manual, their GOM as they call it, that makes the collective bargaining agreement language moot, or we have to fight to change that law. I fought to change the legislation in 2007, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The next thing that that needs to be changed is increase community engagement by tenfold. Community engagement by the staff is really doing well, but I would like to see it go tenfold, especially with the work I've done before, and then because you can see massive results from that. Provide reports that are easy to read for the public, because it needs to be easy to read outside of the statistics. For example, in the 2019 annual report, if you look at it when it says 2019 by the numbers, there's a lot of numbers there. And in that, 33 cases were not certified. My question is, those 33 cases that were not certified, how did Olio improve that to reach the number of 0? Because those cases were not certified because they They didn't have the correct information. They weren't fair. They were unbiased, and they weren't complete. We need to deal with that and get that to zero so we can actually focus on the much larger topics of oversight. There needs to be clear communication in OLEO processes of new charter amendments, what we can do, what we can't do, why we can do it or can't do it, and what can be done to improve or change that. I think that's really important. So OLEO and the community can be on the same page moving forward together. Now, what I've done in the Office of Independent Review in Fresno was community engagement. I just talked about it. I was an office, Fresno was 500,000 people, fifth largest city in California. My office was an office of 2, and I'm glad to see there's 7 here, because what I did was massive 10-fold community engagement with hundreds of meetings, newsletters, monthly case updates, TV appearances, recorded programming series, regular meetings, and building an ad hoc police commission that the city manager and the mayor did not want to have. And they said, no, we can't have it. So I said, I just find another way around it. So I had an ad hoc police commission and used that with the CCCJC. So, and again, we had incredible results. And the last thing on this topic is that I built credibility, particularly here in Washington, credibility and legitimacy in King County as a NACO speaker, speaking in Bremerton about oversight, in Tacoma, going as a participant in the Tacoma Peace Project. Again, like I said, I'm a certified practitioner of civilian oversight, attorneys in oversight, and the law and justice system in law enforcement here gives me that credibility and legitimacy, as we say, that juice that is necessary to move things forward. Now, you cannot buy that anywhere. It's built over time, and that's what I've done here in Washington.
Thank you for that, Mr. Aubrey. We'll move on to the second question, and that is, how do you remain effective while balancing community standards for oversight with the sheriff's department's policies and procedures, which sometimes can be at odds with each other?
Right, and it can be at odds together because there's different agendas, and the system was set up that way. But even though the system's set up that way, you can make incredible strides if you're working together to a common mission, goal, and vision. It's simple to do, but it is really, really hard work. And again, I'm going to refer to this because it comes down to people. It comes down to authentic communication, credibility, integrity, legitimacy, and meaningful relationships. And those are some of the things, as I just talked about, that I've developed and built in King County over my 20 years or so here and in civilian oversight in Washington, California, and nationally. The thing about it is, having all that doesn't mean that you walk in and say, oh, I'm going to change everything. What it means is that it gives you a basis to go ahead and say, hey, look, all right, we can all start at this level. We're all even, but I just have those relationships so they know who I am. And I think that's really important. Then what you do is you identify what is that issue and working through it to a solution, because you really can't solve a problem if you don't know what that problem is. And many times the problem is not on the surface. You have to dig deeper than that. And that goes again with the relationship, the trust, and working together towards that vision. It's beneficial that I'm a trained mediator and I can help facilitate those kind of conversations to reach those mutual agreements that will help build effective oversight. And I've done this, and how have I done it? And balance this is with OIR and OPA, those terms, Fresno and Richmond, through massive meetings, as I've talked about, transparency, listening sessions, the input, and also the integrity of my work and the legitimacy from my experiences, walk the walk, my walk, the reasons for that walk, and the results from that walk. Now, I did have pushback from in OPA, in Richmond and Fresno, from the Police Guild and some citizen groups, because the citizen groups thought, you know, hey, the ordinance didn't give you enough teeth. It has no teeth. And also, by the way, you know, you have that law enforcement experience. I'm a little concerned about that. But what happened is I made believers of them all through the work I did. But work product, and so my work product is rarely questioned, and the work product has some significant findings. They weren't watered down whatsoever. in the Fresno officer-involved shootings, the federal civil rights case in Fresno that I participated in that I can talk about a little bit, the OPA high-profile command cases, and also in Richmond, we had a national media sex case that occurred 1 month when I got there, involving 9 officers in 8 different law enforcement jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And I can talk about that a little bit. Also, discrimination investigation. So the last thing about this is results, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. What results did you get? For example, in Fresno, in the first 12 months, I made 121 recommendations, identified 4 systemic issues, reviewed 12 to 15 officer-involved shootings within that period in the first 18 months. I also had to go ahead and look at the 48 officer-involved shootings that were backlogged for 7 years. But what happened was, through all that work and community meetings and community outreach, what happened was complaints went down to an 8-year low. And this was done by a professional survey company. The public confidence increased from 68% to 80% in 1 year, which is unheard of turnaround in oversight. And 2/3 of the citizens said that the Office of Independent Review had a positive effect on changes of police services, along with the training I did to get the internal affairs instructors to do complete investigations. And like I said, I already talked about the ad hoc group for from the CCJC. So, and in OPA in Richmond, I control everything. I review everything. I certify everything. I investigate everything. All the different investigations, from officer-involved shootings to in-custody deaths, the major media events involving officers in our command staff. And the last thing is, right now we're in the process of civilianizing the entire office to civilian investigators. So those are just some of the things that I've done, and I look forward to doing more work.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Aubrey. And then the prepared questions before we turn over to the community for questions from anyone is, can you please share how you would ensure that OLEO effectively connects with and engages with the communities in King County?
Well, that's a good question. I think I've touched on it in both questions a little bit more, but I didn't get into some of the details. So everyone, and I consider everyone, the staff members in OLEO, first of all, is community outreach to provide meaningful two-way communication. Because we have a community outreach person, we'll have a policy analyst, but everyone is community outreach. And I would actually extend that out to the council and to the sheriff's department, but everyone is community outreach, especially in OLEO. And what I have found useful is to empower each employee. And that's the key, because leadership is needed at every one of those positions in OLEO. So I support a team of inspired oversight leaders, and that's critical to our work. Now, some of the things that I have done, and I'll use Fresno, is that I provided regular, I think some examples of what we can do, which are some of the things I did in Fresno, I should say, is provide regular OLEO insider information. So I love the OLEO insider concept with the newsletter, and provide that on a regular basis with a clear vision, work, and that lists the work in progress and the current events. It's sort of similar to a city manager letter. Our county letter, city manager letters come out every week, every 2 weeks, a month, depending on the city itself, but it gives everyone an update of what's going on, what kind of events are going on, what are the concerns, and what are going on with cases. I think that's really critical. We can do monthly podcasts on specific OLEO topics with speakers, groups, stakeholders, and then farm those out to Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and news, the traditional news press, and push those out. I mean, those are incredible things, and it'll be there forever too. The other thing that I did that we can do here in King County is have a road show. And that road show is basically going out to certain areas in a community meeting on a quarterly basis. And in those different areas, we could have it televised through different events, whether it's the King County TV, invite groups such as the League of Women Voters, which I've worked with before, the ACLU, faith leaders, business groups, nonprofits that are serving vulnerable groups. So, and then of course, then we can look at the grassroots communities such as the Peace on Streets, the ACLU Peace Power, Choose 180, and a lot of other different organizations in Seattle that are doing great work. But that would get more support, more community engagement, and would help move, because what moves the needle is the community. And that has been shown, especially with those charter amendments. And the last thing I'd like to say about this is that, but more importantly than the community engagement things I'm talking about, I think it's important to find out how the community wants to connect and engage. Because no matter what I think about it, the community say, hey, look, we don't really want all that. We just want you, your staff, your people here every month talking to us. Then that's how they want to engage, then, and that's the most effective. That's what we should be doing. So there's more listening, seeing them, and responding and providing information about the statistics and reports, but more than that, what it means for them. And I've done this, like I said, at Fresno as an Office of Independent Review with results, which I talked about earlier. But I also did this with Los Angeles Police Department, interestingly enough. After the Rodney King incident, they knew that I had certain skills. And so I went out and I did town hall meetings after that, which were very, very volatile, let's put it that way. And I was a DARE officer at the time. And so I did not change who I was about anything, just like I don't change anything about who I am now. And I went to those meetings because if anyone remembers the DARE program, the DARE officer is unarmed. And I went to those meetings that were volatile, unarmed, because I don't change my appearance just because of all of these other issues. I am who I am. So I think that's important. And it didn't resolve everything, but it allowed for good communication and good conversation and listening to the voice. And in Richmond, I've been involved with listening sessions to bring about communication, education, and trust of the OPAA office as it is constituted. So I think those are all the things I really wanted to talk about at this time for that question. So I'm open to listening to community questions and answering those.
Yep, and as you are just stated, Mr. Aubrey, this is the time for anyone that has a question they would like to ask Mr. Aubrey. Please either raise your hand or just speak up. I will mention I do have a couple of questions that have been posted in the chat. So if we don't get anyone with a question right away, I'll start asking some of the questions from the chat. Okay, with that, I'll ask a chat question. And Mr. Aubrey, that is, how do you see the role of the King County Community Advisory Committee for Law Enforcement Oversight, or CACLEO? How would you utilize it to the benefit of Oleo and the Sheriff's Office?
Well, I think CACLEO is really important because I see that as similar to using the ad hoc group in Fresno with the CCCJC and partnering with them, or with the police commission, because they have connections with specific parts of the community. Our community outreach person would have connections with the community. I have certain connections with the community, but they will have other connections with the community. And I think that's what's important. And to utilize them to go ahead and understand what the community voice is, what the community wants, what the community wants to see from the police department. How does the community want to be policed? I mean, I think that's one of the greatest things that we've been missing, is that the community has not said, this is the way we want to be policed. And we don't want to be told this is the way to be policed. This is what we want to see. And I think CACLEO is critical in that, especially with their connections. And I think also that CACLEO could go also with their formats and their reports and things like that, can help support the community voice and support the Oleo's work representing the community's voice, but also with all these voices coming in from one area. I think that's really important to say, hey, look, there is a groundswell of community members that are talking about this and wanting to see this. So there needs to be a conversation. And I think that's where it all comes from, because it works really better when we have a lot of people building it versus one person here, one person there, and they're working in different silos. That sort of works, but if you really want to be effective, you really got to put it all together. So I think there's great benefits from from Cacleo, and that's just one group.
All right, thank you for that. Any other questions from the community? Anyone like to ask a question, Mr. Aubrey? Okay, I'm going to ask another one from the chat. You had mentioned earlier about some officer-involved shooting investigations. The question is, of those 12 to 15 officer-involved shootings and the 48 backlogged shootings, how many resulted in recommendations of discipline from your office?
Right. So when you're starting off in office, as you already know in King County, it comes with the beginnings of the charter amendment or the ordinance. And there's a lot of negotiation before an office starts. So that was a new office that was started. And one of the mandates that was agreed upon during that negotiation is that the 48 officer involved shootings would be reviewed, but there would be no recommendations made from those, and those needed to be reviewed to process through. But of course, even though there's no recommendations being made, I did take note of many things that were a pattern. So that was important. Now, the other things too, in Fresno, with those first 12 to 15 officer involved shootings there, the thing that we look at officer involved shootings, and this is one of those things about education, because number one, when an officer has to use force like that, it's terrible. It just is. So the first things that you have to look at, and which is what I look at, is, okay, what is the landscape of the law? We have to deal with the law. And that's partly what I touched on before, is when I went to community meetings and I talked to people about what's going on, and they said, you know, that officer should be fired. There's just clear cut, they should be gone. And I said, I understand what you're saying, but you know, unfortunately there is a process, and this is the process. This is what the law says. This is what the law doesn't say. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. So looking at those shootings, the things about those is that sometimes when you're looking at the shootings, you have to look at, okay, what does the law say about it? Even though we want the law to change maybe or be different, what does the current law say? So you have to deal with that. You cannot get around that. You have to deal with it. And then after you come to those decisions about whether the shooting was reasonable or necessary, then you get to the place of recommendations. And that's where you have the real impact. Because where the law is moving right now is that even though the shooting may have been justified by law, what we're finding out, and through civil litigation, and the laws are slowly changing, is that if the officer placed themselves in a position that was tactically unsound, they made poor decisions before that, and they didn't do proper de-escalation, and then they got to that place where technically the force by law was reasonable. What we're finding now, and what we're coming to conclusions are, that because you place yourself in a position, because you didn't do de-escalation, anything from that is excessive and unreasonable. So that's where the law is going. So to answer those questions there, that's what I have to look at, and those are those cases. Now, I will say, because just like in King County, there are confidential rules, those laws that we talked about. Oh, and by the way, every time I mention this in Fresno and tell them the same thing, they said, yeah, we know. And I said, you got to get the laws changed. And what did they do? In the last few years, they've gotten the laws changed about force, about unreasonable force, about excessive force, and about officer involved shootings, which is exactly what I was advising them to do. And we needed to go that route. But the other thing too, again, because of confidentiality laws, there are cases in officer involved shootings where I did find that those shootings were unreasonable.
Okay, time for a question from the community. Anyone have a question for Mr. Aubrey? Liz.
Hello, Mr. Aubrey. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Liz.
Hello, and welcome, and thank you.
Thank you.
I've lived in the North Highline area, White Center,
Mhm.
which you may be familiar with,
Yes.
and love the community, moved there in 1974, been around a long time. You may know Steve Cox, who was a deputy who died in the line of duty
I do
in
remember
White
that.
Center.
Yes.
A great man. And he kind of led the way in terms of how the sheriff's office seems to deal with us. And like, I'm a member of the North Highline Unincorporated Area Council, and the sheriff's office attends every one of our meetings.
Mhm.
We have a storefront deputy who's very involved, and the sheriff's office is involved. If you get this position, did I understand you correctly that you would also be willing to attend our monthly meetings?
Oh,
Or have some from your office?
yeah, well, absolutely, because and sometimes I try to expand the role of the community. I understand what you're saying, and thank you for the question. I understand what everyone talks about. Generally, when we think of community, we think of citizens, the communities that live there. But I look at community also as everyone who works, lives, and plays in King County. That's the community. So yes, I mean, the community, I would be coming out to your organization and talk with us. I would go out to any organization, anyone that wants me to talk about oversight. And not only for me to give my view, because my view, I think is subservient to the community's view. And I want to know what the community thinks, what they would like to see. So absolutely, it would be important to attend those meetings. And I really like like you said, the storefronts. I really think there should be much more of the storefronts, and even smaller, because the storefronts really still take up a really big area up in White Center, because I did work up at Southwest District Court up there. And so I would like to see that expanded, because that's where you start looking at that community officer who knows the community, who knows everyone around, and they don't have to be such an expansive response to all this other stuff that they really can't control. So no, like I said, I'd be happy to come to your group or any group that wants me to talk or yell at me too. I'm happy to go there, because I think that's where we develop two things. We have our learning and we have our thinking already. But I think where we grow is when we unlearn things and we rethink about things. That's where the growth comes from. And sometimes that growth needs to come from someone outside of your filter. So I hope I answered your question. I think I answered your question. So yes.
You did. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Aubrey, we have 4 questions in the chat. So just wanted to make sure you gauge your time so we can get to all of them, and hopefully there'll be some other questions live as well.
Right.
So I'll go with the next question in the chat. Reviewing an oversight case can be very trying to get all the information needed. Can you explain your process and how you work with all parties to reach a correct recommendation?
Right. So the first part on the oversight case, and that's a really huge question. But the biggest question is unfettered access to information that the Sheriff's Department has. We should have access, just like I have access right now, to the report. Immediately after the incident occurs, I can get the 911 recording. I can get the radio call recording. I can get the callers calling in on 911. I get immediately the police reports. I go out to the scene. I immediately get any police reports that are written. I immediately get any of the body camera video and body camera auditing, which is key. Taser, if taser are used, I get the taser report, but I also get the auditing of taser report. So I get access to everything, and that's what it really should be. Unfettered access to get all that information, not to come to a decision right there and then, but to get all that information to say, hey, this is where the investigation is. This is where information that we need to get to see what's going on, to get a full picture of this. That's really what oversight should be doing in an investigation. And I've handled hundreds of these. I shouldn't say hundreds. I've had many of these cases from the beginning and get-go. And that's where you start seeing what you need to do. And just to end it that way, because there's a lot of stuff you get in between, constant collection of information, but to end it the other way, that's when we get down to the interviews of the officers involved. That way the interviews can be complete and done properly at that point. I've seen investigations where the interview itself might be 8 minutes long of a subject officer involved in a shooting. That right there tells you it wasn't thorough. That's why it needs to be thorough, because I've seen those cases and I've had to go back up and re-interview all those people. So those are the things that are really important. So a big question, but that's from the beginning, unfettered access to everything all the way through, and a really quality interview. Thank you.
Okay, Eddie, thank you. Next to 3 questions that are in the chat. In a top-down hierarchical organization such as law enforcement, it's common practice to place blame as low in the hierarchy as possible.
Right.
Would you share your thoughts and intentions regarding combating this practice so the people higher in the chain of command who make the decisions which lead to poor practices among those under them receive appropriate oversight?
Okay. My thought on that comes from experience. Again, I do have to follow confidentiality rules, but I can tell you in general that I have been involved in cases, and because I oversee the investigations, and when it comes down to certain investigations that might involve command staff, which is what I would hope to see with King County Sheriff's Department, if not, definitely with Olio, is that in those cases, I personally did those investigations. And thoroughness, I think, is a word that people would say well, that's probably your minimum there. When I do investigations, and when Olio, I would hope, do investigations, we are thorough and cover everything from the officers that are there to the supervisors that are there. And that's one of the focuses we've had, especially in Richmond, is because yes, the officers may have done some misconduct, or their actions led to something that shouldn't have happened, whether it was a shooting or whether it was a person that got hurt. But we really look at the supervisors that were there that allowed that to happen, or didn't supervise correctly, or didn't provide the training. Then we go up to the training, and then we go up to command staff. And I can tell you that I have done those investigations and overseen those investigations, and have held from the officer all the way up to command staff personnel responsible for those actions. And that's what Olio needs to be able to. But that gets back to that same question we talked about: unfettered information and access to all information, so that we can have the same information to make the same, that the Sheriff's Department has in their decision making.
All
I tried to
right.
say with 2 minutes per answer, so.
Yeah, and there's 2 more questions waiting. So
Okay.
let me get the next one. What is your experience with police and public corruption? Can you provide examples of how you've handled conflicts of interest involving police and public corruption during your employment history?
Police and public corruption. Again, I have to be, so public corruption. It depends what you mean by public corruption. I have been involved and have handled cases that have involved command staff personnel and city council. And I have personally conducted those investigations. So, and those investigations did not stop with just command staff. So I looked at a lot of different things, a lot of different individuals, because an investigation, you don't know the answer. So you're seeking the answer, you're seeking the truth. And so I've been able to do those kind of things and get down to the truth in those. The other thing about public corruption that I can say is it may be related, is that when I arrived in Richmond, 1 month after I arrived, we had the sex scandal case. I would call that public corruption, and involved 9 different officers and 8 different other law enforcement agencies in the Bay Area with this one prostitute. And she's self-claimed prostitute. And so that was a major investigation testing the civilian who just got there, and what is he going to do about it? how is he going to handle it? And so I handled those things. And what I can tell you through public information that's already out there is that in the beginning and in the process of that, we did hold all of those officers responsible and accountable. It started off with 4 terminations and 5 reprimands. It ended up being 2 terminations through the appeal process, a suspension, a lengthy suspension, and a demotion. And that's just for our officers. Oakland and everyone else had a bunch of other stuff going on. But that's what I can tell you. That is a matter of public record. So I'm not saying anything out of turn. But that's the significant. And that sort of set up my importance, my integrity, the credibility, the legitimacy of the office right from the get-go. And that was really critical in those investigations. And that's what I bring here to King County.
Okay. Mr. Aubrey, we have about 10 minutes left. I do have 4 questions lined up that are 3 actual questions and 1 person with their hand up that wants to ask a question. So
okay,
just do your best so we can get through them all.
I will. I will.
The next question is, how will you deal with the fact that the majority of accountability and transparency challenges or problems need to be bargained with law enforcement unions or guilds? In King County, there has been significant pushback to change policies, accountability, and transparency in investigations.
Well, the first thing on that is I hope that an appointed sheriff changes that landscape versus an elected sheriff. As everyone knows, when you're elected, the only persons you answer to is to the electoral citizens every 4 years or 2 years, or depending on the term. That's all you answer to. Now that you have an appointed sheriff who is now, the relationship is employee-employer relationship with the council as their boss, that changes the whole landscape. And the collective bargaining agreement will have to change, in my opinion, should be eliminated, because oversight should never be bargained for as part as oversight of how they're doing their work. To me, that is ridiculous, because you don't have that with surgeons. You don't have that in the law profession, that the law profession and the surgeons will dictate how they're going to be overseen. So that just needs to be removed. And like I said, in California, they do not have that whatsoever. It should be set up by statute if you're going to do that, but they don't have that whatsoever. So bargaining agreements are not even part of that conversation as far as oversight.
Okay, next question is from Timothy. Timothy had his hand up.
Go to.
Hi, this one's layered. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is layered.
Okay.
So apologies, I wordsmithed. So I know that SPD is part of King County, but this is for a King County Sheriff's position. But the question affects all of us. And I had the question before I realized this is for Sheriff's position. However, the question goes, it does affect all of us, all of us. The president of the Seattle Police Union, Mike Salon, publicly claimed that the January 6th insurrection was instigated by the far left, like Antifa. He's still president of the Seattle Police Union. So in your own professional analysis, how is he still president of the Seattle Police Union after making those broad, verifiably false accusations? Also, from an oversight and accountability position, how can you, from the position you're stepping into, address this kind of misinformation when it's coming from close to the top of the Seattle, close to the top of a major police department in King County? And then noting that whole tapestry, how do we rebuild the trust between the people of King County and the police? Because it affects all of us.
Yeah, I agree, Timothy, and that's a really big question, but really just to hit some points on it there real fast, is that we can't stop private organizations from making their comments, but what we can do is point out the fallacies of what they said. So that is really important there, because just like with any investigation that someone says they know something about, they don't have all the facts, they don't have all the information, and for anyone to come out with a conclusion based on the limited information they have, that's a fallacy. And we need to point that out. No matter who that is or what organizations that is. Now, I'm not specifically saying SPD, but anyone who comes out with that kind of conclusion. And the next thing is, you said oversight is important in King County and Seattle, and hopefully as a partnership and my relationships, we all can work together towards that same vision of oversight in King County and Seattle.
So to the other question, how does he manage to still, what kind of environment fosters him still sitting in that position? And like who's still voting for him to be there if he's president of the police union? And what does that say about the culture that we're dealing with?
Yeah, that's
I
a
didn't
very
mean to throw in a follow-up question, but I did accidentally.
That's a very good question, and those questions should really be posed to the membership of SPOG over in Seattle, because they really should answer those questions, and or they should be thinking about that as who their leaders are. But it's a really important question, and hopefully there would be voluntary dialogue with membership about that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Timmy.
Okay, Mr. Aubrey, we are getting to the end. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question.
Okay.
We're lined up. This one is, considering the new laws passed by the legislators in Washington, how do you plan to operationalize them? Particularly, how do you change the culture in trainings?
That is a huge question. And the culture, the easy part is the training part, because I have enough subject matter expertise, I have enough connections that the training will be easier to implement. It's the implementation of all that training that will affect the culture. And that's really key, because the culture, and I've seen this too, the culture is what really needs to be shifted. And there needs to be really a lot of work with why police officers became police officers, why they became police officers, what do they want as a police officer role? Because as I've said before, being a police officer or a deputy is a calling. It is not a job. If you're there for the paycheck, we call that a paycheck cop. A paycheck cop can't do the best work as someone who has a passion. So that culture does need to be changed. I wish I could get more in depth on that culture, but my experience and my history has allowed police officers who are not a part of any investigations that we're doing come to me and ask questions on how can we be better. And they know who I am, so they circumvent anything else. And they said, hey, there's discrimination, hostile work environment. We normally wouldn't come to anyone, but we're coming to you because we know we can trust you. We know you're going to be credible. We know you're going to do the job. You're not going to hide the ball. And this culture needs to be changed. And I've handled those kinds of investigations, and we have had change. That's what I can tell you.
Okay,
Richmond.
Robert, thank you for that. And then if you would just transition right into some closing comments for the last 2 minutes or so, we'll finish up here today.
All right, great. Thank you. As a closing comment, I believe in accountability and Olio's role. I've watched carefully, like I said, and participated in the evolution of Olio since its inception in 2010. And Olio needs a leader who knows and has been part of the King County community and with demonstrated experience. I think that's highly critical considering the history of King County and what we want to achieve. I hit the ground running because I have a unique, holistic 360-degree evolution of expertise from my history, because I have walked the walk and I've walked my talk all of my life. And that has not changed. It doesn't vary. I have 3 significant advantages. 1 is leadership, 2 is legitimacy, and 3, at the end of the day, what have you done for me? Results. So the first thing is leadership, and success and failure depends on leadership. And that is about the vision, the demonstrated vision I have, the lifelong dedication to this work. It's lifelong. It's not something I just decided to do 5 years ago. Oh yeah, I think this is a good thing to do because it might help. I've done this all my life. This is what I'm about. And I'm not changing that whatsoever. Number 2, on leadership, I know the subject matter. I know the entire body of it, from inside, from outside, from civilian, from law enforcement, from the issues I've seen from law enforcement through the system of inequality through the judiciary. And I've had 12 years as civilian oversight and certified practitioner of oversight. I have proven and demonstrated that even though I have a law enforcement background and justice system, my transformative evolution and expertise has translated into real results in civilian oversight and cast a vision of what oversight can be. I've had leadership roles in various departments for 17 years. Number two is legitimacy. I have credibility and integrity that's been established over 20 years in King County and Seattle with accountability partners and stakeholders. This will help to get the results to do the work we need. Everyone always asks me, what's the one thing that can change? What's the one thing that will really move the needle on oversight, where we will make massive results? And that is all about the credibility, integrity, the relationships you have with people, your demeanor, your respect, no matter any profession you look at. You look at those leaders that have been successful, they've had those qualities. Number three, results, because it boils down to results. And I'm committed to results. I've been committed to this kind of work all my life. And I've shown that I've been committed to making lives safer and helping improve communities all my life. Different ways to do things. I mean, I'm not a person that has a hammer and everything I'm going to use is a nail. I'm going to use that hammer on everything. There's nuances. There's things that you have to push in this area. And there's things that you have to go ahead and negotiate and collaborate. But the vision is never lost. So for example, in Washington State, I made changes in the law. I will, and I have fought for changes in the law to keep our citizens safe. Because of the work I did at Tacoma Community College, Governor Gregoire requested my help and work with a group and committee to provide a supplemental budget to keep our students, or your students, safe at the college and university. And that was SB 5097 and HB 1957 in 2007, 2008 about safe school plans for universities and college in Washington. And that was all a result of my push about this subject to keep our students safe, where we were recognized all over the Northwest about that. Also, civilian oversight in Fresno and in Richmond. I am well respected, even though there's been pushback from the police department and unions, and still had achieved substantial accountability of police officers through command staff personnel. At the Richmond, with the Office of Professional Accountability, I had full accountability measures of officers by a civilian. So I had full reign of that. And now there's civilianation of the entire office. I can't say that word very well. So in Fresno, like I said, I already told you a little bit about the recommendations and the support we had and the turnaround we had in Fresno of 121 recommendations, 4 systemic reviews. 2/3 of the community believed that we had a positive effect in raising the level of service in the police department, and their public confidence in the police increased because of the work we did from 68 to 80% in the first year. Again, that was unheard of results. So just think what we can do together. So I want to thank you for your time. I enjoyed your questions, and I look forward to engaging with everyone further, and hopefully, if offered the job in the future.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Aubrey.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we are going to take a 5-minute intermission. We will return at 1:08 p.m. with Mr. Tamer Abazayed. And I posted our return time in the chat. So anyone that wants to, anyone that comes in later or just wants to be sure, it's that last message, 1:08 p.m. for Mr. Abazayed. Okay, everyone, it is 1:08 p.m. We're coming back off our 5-minute break. And we're going to begin again with our second candidate, Mr. Tamer Abazayed. We'll follow the same format after bringing Mr. Abazayed into the meeting. We'll ask him to take a few minutes to introduce himself. He'll be asked to answer 3 prepared questions that he was given in advance, the same questions that Mr. Aubrey spoke to. And then he also will be available for the balance of the time to answer any questions any of you may have. Last time we had a lot of questions in the chat. you're welcome to either do whatever you're most comfortable with, whether you'd like to post your question in the chat or ask it in the meeting. I'll try to keep an eye on both. If I happen to miss a question in the chat, please speak up and make sure we get to it. So bring in Mr. Abuzaid.
Hello.
Mr. Abuzaid, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Greg. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Mr. Nelson.
We're gonna be formal for the meeting. Hey, so we're gonna follow the same format as yesterday, and I'd like you to take the first few minutes and introduce yourself to the community here in King County, and also explain why you're interested in the position.
Great, sounds good. Thank you. And judging by the time, this may be a more active group than yesterday, so I'll keep everything concise. Hi, everyone. My name is Tamer Abuzaid. If you want to remember how to say my name, it's Tamer like hammer. We can work on the last name if I become director of Olio. I'm currently a staff attorney at the Chicago office of a large civil rights organization. And our cases deal mainly with discrimination based on religion, race, and national origin, wherever the discrimination happens. So it could be in employment, immigration, policing, public accommodations, wherever it occurs. I also work on our policy and advocacy side, mainly focusing on policing. In the past, I've worked at the Civilian Office of Police Accountability in Chicago, participating in many investigations of police misconduct. It is a grueling, taxing, enraging, enlightening job, and we badly need the right people to be doing it. So some of the issues that I've dealt with in terms of investigations include killings by the police, excessive force, domestic violence, constitutional violations, bad police patterns and practices like pertaining to warrants, for example, or biased policing, and other stuff like that. I've also been working with the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression as their legal counsel, which that is an organization that grew out of the Committee to Free Angela Davis back in the early 1970s. This to me is the most important work that I've done. We were able to free survivors of police torture, either through the courts or through getting pardons. We are currently very close to passing an ordinance in Chicago over the objection of the mayor that strengthens our police oversight system and gives it some real teeth. To get a step closer to community control of the police. I have been working with the Chicago City Council, drafting this ordinance, negotiating the ordinance, doing research, testifying at committee hearings. So I have that policy experience as well. But the reason that I believe my work with the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression is the most important is not just because it made me well-versed in policy. It's not because it really taught me how to navigate government and meetings with different stakeholders and office holders and mayoral staff and so on, but it is because it kept me really close to the communities that we're trying to serve. I've made amazing connections with family members of people who have seen their friends and families killed by the police, maimed by the police, wrongfully detained, wrongfully arrested, wrongfully incarcerated for decades sometimes. The latest person who came out was in there for over 20 years. Actually, I think over about 30 years. And all because a confession was extracted from him through torture. And that's not just according to us, but it's according to a torture commission that the state of Illinois established because this was such a rampant problem in Chicago. So this ability to connect with the community and to feel part of the community, it truly cemented in me the knowledge that nothing about public safety can work unless it comes from the community. And it has to specifically, even more specifically, come from communities that are over-policed. I am someone who believes in shrinking the prison industrial complex. I'm proud of that. I don't think it serves us in terms of public safety. I think if we increased public safety by the amount of people we put in prison, we would have the safest country in the world. We don't. Now, to be frank, getting there, it's not just about an office like the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, like OLEO. Getting there takes serious oversight from an office like OLEO. It takes serious policy recommendations and investigations and pattern and practice investigations from an office like OLEO, but it also takes political decisions made by the representatives of the people, right? By your elected representatives. So under my leadership, the office would keep very close relationships with the public. At the end of the day, the political decisions of what public safety looks like, how to tackle the root causes of violence in our communities, how to deal with crime, and whether our approach should be punitive or rehabilitative or transformative, these are questions that I think we're all grappling with, and we're trying to find the right answers. And those have to be answered on a larger scale than just police oversight. So it would be my honor to play a role in a larger transformation of reevaluating what public safety looks like. The ordinance that creates this office states that the office is supposed to represent the interests of the public. And that is what I promise to do if I become OLEO director. It represents the interests of the public when it comes to oversight of the King County Sheriff's Office. But I will always remind myself, remind you all, remind the county's elected and appointed officials that there are many other parts of the puzzle as well that need to be addressed. And with that, Greg, I'm ready to take questions.
Okay, we're going to move to the first of the three prepared questions. And that is, what do you believe are the necessary ingredients for an effective police oversight office? And based on your evaluation of OLEO, what is King County doing right and what changes are needed?
So I believe there are a few important things that I wanna stress in terms of having an effective police oversight office. Number one is independence. Independence from the political leadership, such as, for example, the county council or the county executive. Obviously, the county council oversees OLEO, but making, doing the work of OLEO needs to be done independently of these bodies. It also needs to be independent in terms of being objective, right? It has to be based on facts and data that we are able to collect, as opposed to based on the political whims of me, for example, right? Like, I can't, just because I think something randomly is a good idea, I can't say, here you go, this is OLEO's recommendation. No, it has to be something that can be based on objective data that we can look at. Another thing is transparency. I think there is no oversight without transparency. And if we are going to demand, if OLEO is going to demand transparency, for example, from the King County Sheriff's Office, it has to, in turn, also provide transparency to the community and be very clear about explaining things. I'm not interested in a communication strategy that all it does is, spin stuff and do PR so that we can look good. To me, communications is about really explaining to the public what we're working on, and making sure that the public is aware, and if they want the information, it's always there. The third thing is community engagement. It is, like I said earlier, nothing will work without if it doesn't come out of the community, right? And so that is one of the most important things in an effective oversight office. Fourth is taking a proactive approach. I think, and that really pertains more to policy. I think it's really important to not wait till you see a problem before you try to fix it. It is really important to continually collect data and continually evaluate what is working and what is not working, and be able to make your decisions based on that. Instead of waiting for a tragedy to happen, let's try to see if we can change those bad things before tragedy happens. And finally, I think that it's really important for a police oversight office to have power. This is something that is generally not present in the vast majority of offices like this in the country. And the power doesn't necessarily have to squarely lie with, an office like OLEO, but at the very least, there has to be willingness from political leadership to back up the office and its demands, and to be able to, for example, ensure that the office is able to carry out its mission without interference from the various people that may want to interfere. As far as what we're doing right, I'll just mention one thing. I think to me, the biggest thing that we're doing right now is this selection process. Here I am in the second meeting, meeting with members of the community, answering questions, telling you all what I believe. This is so important. And this process needs to be the process moving forward, not just with the Olio director, but also with selecting the new sheriff. And, generally speaking, let's keep things very transparent and open to people. As far as things to change, I can think of a few. Number one, the police contract, right? The collective bargaining agreement with the police. There are things in it that really handcuff Olio, and those things need to be fixed. This is not just a King County problem. It is not just a Washington problem. It is a national problem where these CBAs, these collective bargaining agreements, are very, very favorable to officers who engage in misconduct and really hamper the ability of true accountability to take place. Another thing is making sure that we dedicate the right resources to Olio. And finally is to really build the legal mechanisms to ensure that the sheriff's office is cooperating in a timely way with Olio, right? Because it can't just be a matter of, hey, please cooperate with us, and then it takes 2 years to cooperate with us. There have to be mechanisms in place to be able to say for sure, hey, this is what you have to do. And if not, hopefully you do, and we'll say please, but if not, then there are consequences, and it has to be done anyway. And that's where I think the backing up from political powers needs to be. And I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you for that. Yeah, we'll move on to the second question. How do you remain effective while balancing community standards for oversight and the Sheriff's Department's policies and procedures, which can be at odds with each other?
Yeah, I think the first thing we have to remember is that we have to come at it from the standpoint that any power that Olio has, any power the council has, any power the sheriff has, anybody in government really, any power they have actually belongs to the people. And that has to be the approach that you take from the beginning, because we are, or at least we try to be, in a democratic society. And that means the people tell the police how to act, not the other way around. So to the extent that the people say one thing and anybody else says another, then the will of the people is what has to carry, because that is where all the power truly rests and where it truly comes from. Now, practically, what does that mean? Since part of Olio's mandate is to be a conduit to the community, we have to listen to what the community is telling us, including what the community believes are the proper standards for oversight. Once we get that input, you do two things. Number one is you conduct our own research into whether these things that the community is suggesting would actually benefit the public and be good for the public and good for public safety. If we find that it does, then we need to take that step forward and try to make those happen and put it on paper and make those recommendations. If we find through our research that these recommendations that we're hearing from the community would not benefit the public, then obviously that's something that Olio would not be able to recommend. But I think even in that case, if Olio won't recommend something or endorse it, we still have the duty, as someone who is taking in this input from the community, we still have the duty to relay that information to places like the county council and the sheriff's office, right? We still have to do that even if we don't endorse a recommendation. So basically, at the end of the day, it's about taking community input and then running it through this objective exercise and see whether, based on input and data, what position we should take and what position the data supports. Now, I also want to say that this doesn't mean that we have to, have absolute proof that something is gonna, reduce crime by 30% and benefit the public before we recommend it, right? People sometimes forget that hypothesis is part of the scientific process. So if we need more information, then we try to gather that information. If we need to, recommend that we run some kind of pilot program to collect more data, then we can do that as well. But what we need to also remember is that oversight is about policing. It's very specifically about the implementation of policing, right? And that is one piece of the puzzle. But policing and public safety are not the same thing. So I think really the bigger changes that the public demands are things that are more holistic, that don't necessarily fall just under police oversight. Things like spending priorities, pre-trial detention, policy when it comes to housing and employment and tons of other things. We are facing right now nationally a rise in crime. And I think if you go back a year and a half, you will see that many, many people predicted this. And you didn't have to be a genius to predict this, because what will happen after a year and a half of a pandemic when people were getting very little relief? We know there is a very strong correlation between the economic situation of people and crime, right? Now, we knew it was coming. What did we do about it? What we did or didn't do about it is not an issue of police oversight. It's an issue of political decisions that have to be made by the community and by its representatives. So when it comes to those things, I think I look forward to being a partner with the community in amplifying the community's voice on what it believes are should be done. And of course, when it comes to things that Olio can recommend, things like recommending changes in policies, what kinds of things should you stop people for, use of force guidelines, bias policing, things like that. That has to be based on community input plus objective standards.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to move to the last of the prepared questions, and then we'll turn it over to the community for their questions. So can you please share how you would ensure that Olio effectively connects with and engages the communities in King County?
Yes. It's really hard making the same joke twice, but I made this joke yesterday and I'll make it again today because my wife says that I'm a ham, which is good because I want everybody in King County to know about Olio and know what it does, right? I was really happy to hear yesterday from one of the Olio employees about the kind of communication that we like to engage in, and that it comes more from a place of providing information and receiving information and kind of a co-governance model as opposed to a PR and spin model. That is really great. What I'm interested in is blanketing the community with information so that everybody in King County knows three things: what Olio is, what Olio does, and what Olio can and cannot do under the law. And the way I envision achieving this is through three steps. Number one, I think we have to use media to our advantage. All kinds of media, all kinds of different media to reach everybody that we can. We're talking about countywide stuff, but we're also talking about local stuff. We're talking about social media. We're talking about hyper-local media outlets, right? I want people to read about Olio, not just in a Seattle newspaper, but in your local newsletter as well. If you're having something for just your small community, just a few blocks of, we'll be there. We want to be there to spread the word. Number two, I think we have to hold regularly large public meetings or town halls all over the county and be very intentional in reaching out to communities that may be underrepresented in these things. We want to make sure that we hear everybody's voice, and communities that have specific grievances. We need to, focus, for example, on communities of color. We need to focus also on communities of immigrants, right? There are lots of different communities, lots of sub-communities, if you will, that have specific grievances, and we need to target our outreach to make sure that we get everybody's input. And then the third step is to have these smaller meetings where we can really get to know one another and really get a better understanding of what the community is trying to tell us. Instead of these large public meetings, we dedicate small meetings to specific issues or specific communities. You know, for example, how does the sheriff deal with non-binary or trans people, right? Or what are some special considerations when it comes to people in rural areas? Or, you know, special considerations when it comes to dealing with people in you know, unincorporated versus incorporated towns, right? Things like that. So we have to focus our small meetings on these sort of very specific points to be able to gather as much information as possible, because communication can't be a one-way street. It has to be a two-way street. We want to tell people as much as we can what it is we do and how to use us. And then we have to also open our ears and be able to listen to all the input that is coming, because it will be valuable.
All right, thank you for that. As you may have gathered, today's a little different than yesterday in the amount of activity. We have a lot of questions. They came a little slow last night, maybe just the energy level of people midday versus late. But I have some lined up in the chat, so I'm going to start taking those one by one. And if anyone does have a question they'd like to ask live in the meeting, please either speak up when there's an opportunity or raise your hand through Zoom. So the first question in the chat: how do you see the role of King County's Community Advisory Committee for Law Enforcement Oversight, or CACLEO? How would you utilize it for the benefit of Olio and the Sheriff's Office on the broader issue of reimagining public safety that serves all of its citizens?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it kind of relates a little bit to what I talked about earlier. I think the CACs are a great conduit to the community. And it is a great way to be able to get input from the community. Now, it is one avenue, right? We cannot simply put all of our eggs in that basket and say, okay, the CACs will take care of that part. We don't need to do anything else. We need to continually be looking for additional avenues to be able to get information. And then, like I said, you know, when we get recommendations from community members and community organizations about what public safety should look like and how that does or doesn't involve policing, then it becomes our duty to relay that information to the council and the sheriff's office, and you know, do our own research and try to gather the data that we can to actually see whether this is something that we believe would benefit the public, and if so, then make that recommendation. I also think it's necessary, you know, when you make that recommendation, for example, to be public about it, to let people know, to let the community know that it's been heard, and to allow the community, if the community wants to engage in other, you know, pressure tactics or whatever it is, then they can do that, right? Because again, at the end of the day, it's the people who have the power, and they should be able to decide how their government is run.
Okay, very good, and appreciate the concise answer, because there's a few questions lined up. So the next one, in a top-down hierarchical organization such as law enforcement, it's common practice to place the blame as low in the hierarchy as possible. Would you share your thoughts and intentions regarding combating this practice so that the people higher in the chain of command who make the decisions which lead to poor practices among those under them receive appropriate oversight?
That is a great question, and I do agree that too often we see you know, people in lower positions sort of be sacrificed, and people who really should have known better, who are higher up, get away with well, sometimes get away with murder, like literally. I think it is very important to look at whenever, for example, you're conducting investigations, let's say, to look at not just the idea of what happened and what the current laws or general orders are at that point, but also what should have happened. So what is and what should be is what I'm trying to say. Obviously, to hold a police officer, for example, accountable for something they did, we have to be able to show, hey, listen, you were told to do A and you did B, right? There you go. You did the wrong thing. This is something that you have to be accountable for. But then we also have to ask ourselves the question, is A really the right thing to be doing, right? And that goes into higher questions of general orders, of policy, of practices that may be written or not written, of supervision that may be good supervision or bad supervision. All these things play a big role into whether whether an officer does something the right way or the wrong way. So we have to be willing to take that extra step and not just look at someone who, the person who actually, used the baton, for example, but also what the order said to him, what the training said to her, what the supervisor has done or hasn't done in the past, right? Like if a supervisor has seen this 5 times and has never said anything, well, that's a problem. That's someone who should be held accountable too. So I think it just means looking at things in the right scope and seeing both the very specific facts, but also the bigger concept.
Okay, very good, Mr. Abizade. Next, this next
Greg, please call
person-
me Tamer.
Yes. Next person said that they were many years ago responsible for vetting potential police officers. And one of the most significant hurdles was that the cultural differences between regions and departments. Would you please address concerns about how you would effectively do this job with your apparent lack of cultural understanding of Washington State, King County, and its communities?
Sorry, can you give me a sec to read that? Because I'm not sure I got the question. I have it in front of me in the chat. Just give me 1 sec.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's a fair question. Obviously, there are a lot of cultural differences between different places. I would also say that there are a lot of similarities in, not just in policing, but really in any kind of paramilitary organization, right? Any kind of organization that has the structure of a chain of command, that has this idea of people getting trained a certain way, people getting taught all the same thing, all that, right? The kind of the kind of camaraderie that it builds, and the kind of bonds that happen between people. That stuff is very similar in a lot of different places. So it's definitely it will definitely take some effort on my part to understand the differences in culture, and I look forward to doing that. But I think at the end of the day, even though culture may differ, what is and isn't, constitutional, for example, doesn't really differ that much, right? Because most states and most places have certain rules that follow certain models. Now, that doesn't mean that it'll be easy. It will be hard, but it's something that I think can be done as long as you're able to dedicate some time to.
Okay, terrific. Before going into the rest of the questions, I just want to pause and see if anyone has a live question, anyone that wants to ask a question in the meeting. Otherwise, I'll just keep moving through questions in the chat. Okay, so the next one is, considering the new laws passed by the legislature in Washington, how do you plan to operationalize them? Particularly, how do you change the culture and trainings required to enact these new bills?
That is another really good question. I think one thing that we have to remember is that culture, number one, is very difficult to change. Number two, when it does change, it will generally change slowly. And number three, there is immense resistance to change, and that's just a fact of being a human being. People often fear change. Having said all these things, we are at a point in time when we have made the decision that the change is the time for the change is now, right? And in terms of operationalizing certain changes, I think that's where you have to really work with all the stakeholders to be able to find something that will work for everybody. I think it is essential, for example, to listen to people who, the people who are policed, and to get their input on the kinds of necessary changes. But I think it's also important to try and get buy-in from as many people as possible who we are whose culture we are trying to change. And there will be resistance, but it's, at the end of the day, I can't remember which president talked about the carrot and the stick, right? At the end of the day, there has to be good consequences for good work and bad consequences for bad work. That is something that will speed up the kind of change necessary. And where there is training that can effectively implement these changes, then of course we have to take advantage of that as well.
Okay, next question's with so many areas in the county with various needs, how would you define community?
So like I said earlier, I think I look at when I say community, that as a general term, that means everybody everybody who lives in King County, basically, right? Because everybody who lives in King County may be subject at one time or another to the jurisdiction of the King County Sheriff's Office. But within that large community is lots of different sub-communities. And, I'm not too many to mention, right? But you have to be willing to intentionally reach out to these different communities. For example, communities of Black people, communities of Asian people, Latinx people, rural communities, transgender people, tons and tons more, right? You have to intentionally reach out to all these different communities, because they may have special concerns, they may have special wisdom, and of course at the same time they are also a part of the larger community. And so what they are saying is just as valid. Just because it's a small group, for example, doesn't mean what they're saying is not valid. It means that we take that input and we act on it as appropriate and make sure to listen to it.
Okay, and then we have Timothy with his hand up to ask a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I asked the same question of Eddie. I just wanted to get your response. I just wanted to get your response to the same question. So I know this is for King County Sheriff's oversight, but Seattle Police Department is part of King County. And this scenario affects all of us in King County and beyond King County. The president of the Seattle Police Union, Mike Salon, publicly claimed that the January 6th insurrection had been instigated by the far left, like Antifa, a statement which is verifiably false. From an oversight and accountability position, how do we address the issue of this kind of misinformation coming from very close to the top of the police department, even if it's a private organization connected to the police department? How do we address this kind of misinformation when it's coming close to the top? Also, sub-question, from your professional analysis, how is he still president of the police union after making those statements? And then third, how do we rebuild the trust between the police and the people of King County with that level of bad faith propaganda and misinformation coming out of it? Like, how do we rebuild from there? That's my question.
That's your questions, Timothy.
Zzz,
Yes, thank you.
Zzz,
Um,
yes.
so I think these are great, and you know, questions that are both complicated and should not be that complicated. Should be a little more simple. To answer your first question, obviously, as you know, as a government actor, you know, Olio has to be very careful when it comes to people's free speech rights, right? And that is something that, you know, is just, you know, your hands are tied in certain situations. So if someone on their own time, using their own resources and whatever else, says something so verifiably false and stupid, then there's not really much that we can do there. Now, there are sometimes you will find certain rules and regulations within police departments that say things like, you can't do anything that you know, you can't do anything that puts the department, for example, in disrepute, or something to that effect, right? That brings disrepute or shame or whatever to the department. Now, if that is a rule, and you know, you didn't follow it, then you have to be accountable for how you didn't follow it. So there are some things that we can do, and there are definitely a lot we can do if you're using government resources to say these things. But then you also have to be very careful to balance that with the free speech and constitutional law aspect of it. The second part was about trust between law enforcement and the people. And you know, our job at Olio is not to make law enforcement look good, right? That's not our job. The only way that we can increase trust between law enforcement and the people is to conduct to do really good work, basically, to conduct good investigations when we conduct them, and hopefully the collective bargaining agreement will change regarding that. But to through our work, to have the people first trust in our oversight process, right? It's not necessarily that you will agree with every outcome, but it's about trusting that we are doing things the right way and we are engaged in a good, fair process, and that we listen to the people of King County. As far as trust between law enforcement and the people goes, that again is something that is not done through words, it is done through actions. Trust is earned. So if you want to earn someone's trust, you have to show them time and time again that you are worthy of it. You have to show them that you respect their rights. You have to show them that you respect the oversight process. You have to show them that you listen to their concerns when it comes to policy and all that stuff. So Olio can be a conduit when it comes to that, but it cannot really force trust unless it is earned by law enforcement, on behalf of the people. The third question is, how is he still president? I don't know. I wish I could answer. Our FOP president here in Chicago has said similar things and has said that January 6th wasn't a big deal, and it's like people taking a trip or something like that. And that's someone who was obviously elected by a majority of police officers, and it's something that really does damage the trust. But it's a democratic process, and if that's who people choose, that's who they choose. But of course, every choice has consequences in terms of how people view you and how much people will be willing to work with you.
Okay, Tamara, one more question lined up in the chat, and then I'll just ask again for any other live questions, or hopefully we'll have another. What are your thoughts on getting the country off the bubble on the use of body cameras? More than a year after promising a trial program as part of a multi-million-dollar wrongful death settlement, no program has been launched. Do you support their use and the rapid release of pertinent videos?
That's a great question. Do I support the use of body-worn cameras? I do, with some caveats. And my main caveat would be, let's use body-worn cameras, but let's not take money away from other important things to buy them. Meaning that, you know, try to find the money for the body worn cameras already from the budget or through some kind of outside grant where it doesn't cost the county money. Do I support their use? Yes, absolutely. As an investigator, they prove to be a very good tool, sometimes tricky because sometimes even the video lies, but it's really an invaluable tool in terms of investigations. And do I support the rapid release of videos? Absolutely, 100%. I think way too often, you know, organizations or government bodies, public bodies, use things like FOIA exemptions way too loosely to cover all kinds of things that shouldn't be covered. In my work in policing, that includes, you know, saying, oh, it's an active investigation, we can't do anything. Oh, it's an active investigation, we can't do anything. And then you see the video 5 years later. That is not acceptable. The people have a right to see these things. And unless you can very specifically and clearly and convincingly pinpoint how releasing that video is going to negatively affect an investigation, then that has to be released. So I look forward to making sure that there is a policy in place once there are body worn cameras, that there is a policy in place for videos to be released regularly to the people so that people can see for themselves what has happened.
Okay, good timing. Another question is just lined up. Would you be willing to look into whether any sheriff's office personnel attended the January 6th insurrections? The current administration has not shown any interest. In contrast, SPD's OPA has conducted an extensive review.
Yeah, sure. Concise answer, yes. I think that, you know, again, you know, after a thorough review of the rules and regulations and general orders and all that stuff, I am fairly certain that once we do that review, there will be many things that apply to taking part in something like the January 6th insurrection. For example, committing a crime or doing this or doing that, right? All these things are supposed to be against the code of conduct for law enforcement officers or for King County sheriffs. And I do think that the people have a right to know that, and people should be held accountable for what they've done.
Okay, and for the first time, we're all caught up on questions. So I'm just going to make an appeal. If anyone would like to have a question that they'd like to ask Tamara, just feel free to raise your hand, speak up, post it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. Martina,
Hi,
right
thanks.
ahead.
Thanks, Tamer. You mentioned several times the use of data as one of the supports for decision making. And I wonder if you could tell us a little about perhaps a time that you really felt that the use of data made a difference to policing in your experience.
Sure, that's a great question. When over here in Chicago, for example, we were dealing with the issue of how can we predict misconduct, right? And Northwestern University did a large study about were there certain predictors of misconduct on the part of officers. And what they found was amazing. One of the things they found was that about, I think, 10% of officers were responsible for something like 90% of the settlement money that has been paid out, right? And then it looked into those cases and it found that for many of these troubling officers, there were a lot of signs from before that came that we simply did not pay attention to. Some of those even include complaints that are filed, but where a finding isn't even made. Just the fact that there was a certain number of complaints against someone was enough of a predictor that this officer will likely, engage in misconduct. Now, the way that I pushed for and I wished for greater implementation of in terms of the findings of this study, which was met with some resistance and also with collective bargaining agreement problems. But one of the things we did was make sure that part of conducting an investigation included looking at the history of the officer, and not just, for example, at complaints that were sustained, but at all kinds of complaints, even if they were just administratively closed for whatever reason. And looking at that helped give us a clearer idea. And then we were also able to use other things other than discipline to try to intervene. So for example, there are certain early intervention programs that they implemented to try and nip these problems in the bud. And these interventions, sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. But that's an example of the kind of research that I want to do and look at. Obviously, we can't do all the research ourselves. There's lots of good work done by academic institutions and think tanks and all that stuff. But I want Olio to also be its own mini think tank in terms of doing the research, looking at the data, and coming up with evidence-based solutions.
Okay, I have another question for you. Knowing that collective bargaining requirements are a large barrier to accountability and transparency efforts, could you speak some more to how you would respond to those challenges?
Yeah, thank you. They certainly are a big impediment. And I think when it comes to something like the CBA, so, obviously there's a division of labor in the government, right? And the role, the Olio must play a very important role in negotiating the collective bargaining agreement. And it has to be done in a way that actually responds to the concerns of Olio and its staff. So whoever is responsible for negotiating those agreements, whoever the negotiator is, must be willing to accept input from Olio and to really fight for it. And at the end of the day, if you face complete refusal from, for example, the police union in terms of agreeing on certain things, fine, take advantage of arbitration. Go for it. We have to, work as hard as possible and do everything we can to make sure that we have a system that will actually allow for real accountability. And currently, thankfully, the tide is changing a little bit in terms of what arbitrators or courts may be willing to say. For example, there was a disagreement here in Chicago with the Sergeants Union over whether to include disciplinary history older than 5 years in certain considerations, or if we had to destroy it. And the CBA, the old CBA, said you had to destroy it. And then the city was negotiating and said, no, we don't want to do this anymore. And they did not agree. It went to arbitration, and the arbitrator found in the city's favor and said, no, even though it's your CBA, the CBA is against public policy. And so we're going to strike that provision down. You don't have to destroy these records. So there are avenues that you can take if the will is there. And if the people, if that is what the people want, then that is what the people's representatives have to be willing to do.
All right, thank you for that answer. We are getting right up against the end of our time. I will just want to do one last call, see if there was one last question anyone would like to ask. And if not, we'll ask you to just move right into your closing. All right, if you'd like to just share some closing comments.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming. This was great. Lots of great questions. I really appreciate you taking the time to attend this. It is really great to have community members who are involved and who really want to know about the stuff and give their input. So I encourage you to please, whether you like what I said or didn't, please, use that link to give your input. It would be a real honor to work as the OLIO director and to try to advance this mission of making sure that we are looking at public safety in the right way and make sure that we have real oversight of policing in King County. And at the end of the day, if there's one thing that I want people to remember is that it's really about process and not about outcomes. We will never agree on 100% of the things that we say. No two people will ever agree on anything. But at least we should know that the process used to get there was one that is fair, is measured, takes into account community input, and is a good process that we can repeat over and over again. So even if we disagree with an outcome, it is at least something that we know we got there the right way. So to me, that's the most important thing. And that is really what will create trust in the oversight system, and hopefully will also create trust between community members and their governments at large.
All right, well, just thank you for your continued interest and your time today. We know we're keeping you two very busy, and look forward to next week when we have the rest of the selection activities. So thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Okay, just in closing, thank all of you for the active participation. We had a good meeting last night. Today, I think, was even more active. So I just appreciate all of that. And I just once again posted the link for the survey opportunity. And I am also going to make sure that the recordings of this, as soon as Zoom is able to finish our recording and get it up in the cloud, we will have the recordings up on King County's website. And so I just wanted to make sure that all of you know that anybody that wasn't able to attend the meeting, they're able to watch the meeting later and still provide feedback. I did have a question, Timothy, on how long you have to complete the surveys. Because the surveys are going to be open for people watching the recordings as well, we're gonna leave the surveys open through the remainder of this week. We'll close the surveys on Monday, and that way we have time to compile the results and get them to the King County Council on Tuesday. So anyone that wants to watch the meeting later is able to do that, provide feedback later. We're going to distribute the links to do that through King County's website. Specifically, it'll go out to all the council members' offices. We're going to try to make the shreds available abundantly. And so with all of that, I just want to again thank you all for your participation. I'm going to stay on here for just a moment to get that last link up for where you can find the recordings.